This is Bloomberg Law with June Grasso from Bloomberg Radio.
The last time I appeared before Congress, I came to protect Mr. Trump. Today, I am here to tell the truth about Mr. Trump.
Michael Cohen's testimony in the Trump hush money trial is similar to his congressional testimony back in 2019, in that he explained how he went from being Donald Trump's lawyer and fixer to being the star witness against him. Cohen has testified that the former president signed off on a plan to cover up the $130,000 hush money payment to adult film actress Stormy Daniels to keep their alleged sexual encounter out of the news ahead of the 2016 election. The prosecution has basically built its case around Cohen, who will be the final witness for the Manhattan DA. Joining me is Bloomberg legal reporter Patricia Hurtado, who's been in the courtroom for all the testimony. Before we go inside the courtroom, Pat, let's talk about how Republicans, including the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, Alabama Senator Tommy Tuberville, and other Republicans came to support Trump on Tuesday and make statements on his behalf outside the courthouse.
Mike Johnson showed up outside the courtroom, but never went inside the courtroom. So go figure that. So he was there to support Trump, but didn't go into the courtroom. So the Republican politicians showed up to show their support for Trump. And then, with the exception of Mike Johnson, 4 of them went in to the courtroom and sat in the front row. And then during a break, they left in the morning and came back late. And they arrived just as Michael Cohen was describing to the jury how he decided to plead guilty and start cooperating with the government. And it was a very heartfelt moment where he was describing how he basically had a reckoning with his children, his eldest daughter, who was a freshman at the University of Pennsylvania. And he said he was protecting his family, and then his daughter told him that we're your family, they're not your family, and you have to think about us. And that's when he decided to plead guilty. And he's choking up with emotion, and then who comes clattering down the center aisle of the courtroom, disrupting proceedings, but the Republicans who came to show their support for Donald Trump. It was a weird, disjointed moment. I don't know if the jury was paying attention. It was kind of, for those of us, the reporters in the audience, it was odd to see people being allowed to walk into the courtroom in the middle of trial, in the middle of testimony, and no one said a word to them. That would not be permitted from anyone else. But this group en masse arrived and clambered down the aisle, clonking with their heels and sitting down.
Has the prosecution complained to the judge about the fact that, for example, Mike Johnson, in his statement, he's saying almost word for word what Trump has said about the trial, about Michael Cohen. So Trump is using them to avoid the gag order he's under.
Trump yesterday called them his surrogates, and it does appear that he's using them as his mouthpiece surrogates to speak and say the things he's not permitted. Now, as a defendant, Judge Mershon, who's presiding over the case, has some power and authority over Trump to say behave and don't make comments about the witnesses and the jury. I guess this is their way of trying to do an end run around the court rules and around the judge's gag order. No one has complained yet, and I don't know if Mershon has any authority to say anything to direct members of Congress or former politicians like Vivek Ramaswamy to not say anything.
I don't think the judge has any control over what they say. Let's turn now to Michael Cohen's testimony. Tell us about his demeanor on direct examination.
He made quite a different presentation than he did when he testified at the New York Attorney General civil fraud case in October. There he was harried. He filled out his story. He was very anxious, nervous, and he went on and gave very long answers that were very disjointed. And then when cross-examination came up, was cross-examined by Alina Habba, Trump's lawyer, she managed to immediately get under his skin, ruffle him, unnerve him, and needle him. And then he got very combative and defensive. This time, he didn't do that. His answers on direct examination by the prosecutor, Susan Hoffinger, was very methodical, quiet. He gave very simple answers, no ma'am, yes ma'am. He didn't elaborate or embroider any long, involved anecdotes. I thought it was very effective because basically he told a very simple story. And this is a story he's been telling, as we all remember, since he pleaded guilty in August 2018. So for 6 years, he's told this different story. And now he got his chance to finally confront Trump. He did a couple of times shoot a glance over at the defense table. But I did notice whenever he got up and to be moved and leave the courtroom, the court officers sort of blocked him off from Trump. And they basically stopped any confrontation. And that's kind of what happened when Madeleine Westerhout testified. She seemed to want to go up to Trump, but the court officers prevented her. And Trump seemed to try to go up to Hope Hicks and greet her, but was again blocked. None of this was allowed to happen in front of the jury.
Explain how he explained the hush money payment to Stormy Daniels, Trump's connection to the hush money payment to Stormy Daniels.
The big 70,000-foot version is that macro view is that they find out after the Access Hollywood papers come out in October 2016, weeks before the election, they find out that Stormy Daniels is shopping her story. And the reason they find this out is because of this agreement they have with David Pecker and the National Enquirer. Cohen and Trump get alerted about this salacious story that Stormy Daniels is trying to shop her story. Porn star said she had sex with Trump in 2006 and had a sexual encounter with him. As a result of that, he alerts everybody, and he starts reaching out to Keith Edelman, who's Stormy's lawyer, and they discuss some kind of payment. And he's discussing this with David Pecker as well, who had originally agreed to pay off $150,000 to Karen McDougal, the Playboy model, to buy her silence for her story about her liaison with Trump. And then National Enquirer paid $50,000 for a doorman, a Trump Tower doorman, who claimed that Trump had fathered an illegitimate child with one of the female Latina employees. So Pecker had already forked over $180,000 at this point. So Pecker consulted with his lawyer and told Cohen he wasn't going to pay anymore. And apparently Pecker now became concerned that this could be a campaign finance violation, so he didn't want to pay. So then Cohen says he got very concerned about having to pay this off quickly because the election was about to happen. And Trump had told him, this is terrible. This is, quote, a disaster for the campaign. If I win, it won't matter. And if I lose the presidency, I won't care. And then Cohen says that Trump was polling terribly with women. So he was worried, too. So then the decision comes to he's going to pay Stormy off himself. So he has this discussion. Pecker won't pay. He decides to make the payment. And he describes in great detail a lot of the things that jury's already seen. They've seen text between Stormy's agent and her lawyer discussing the payment. They've seen emails between Cohen and Stormy's lawyer discussing the payment. They've seen bank records where Cohen made the payment. And now we hear it from his own words, linking him up to Trump. What he said, which was very interesting yesterday, the last day of direct, was that he has a discussion with Trump after the election at the White House in the Oval Office. And Trump asks him, are you doing okay? And he says, well, he mentions that he hasn't been paid for January and February, which would be the start of the payments to the repayment of the $130,000 that he was supposed to get back from Trump. So Trump tells him to go see Ellen Weisselberg. And Ellen Weisselberg, who was not allowed to do anything financially without Trump's approval, and he was not allowed to sign any check for over a certain amount of money without prior permission from Eric Trump, Don Jr., or Donald Trump himself, suddenly is sending checks to him. So Don Jr. and Eric pay for a $70,000 installment, which is 2 checks for January and February. And then the jury saw another check signed, and then they saw the 8 checks that he said Donald Trump signed from the White House when Donald Trump was president already in 2017. So every month onward, 8 checks signed by Donald Trump personally, and to his testimony that Donald Trump has proclaimed in books and in interviews that he wouldn't sign any check without knowing exactly what it was for.
So, Pat, what are the documents that are most supportive of his testimony that corroborate his claims that Trump knew and approved of the hush money payments?
The checks, there's emails, there's tons of records, and there's tons of text messages back and forth. There is a handwritten document, and it's basically Weisselberg's scratch notes calculating how he'd repay Cohen. It got, quote unquote, grossed up and multiplied up. It was $130,000. Cohen said he was owed a $50,000 for a job he'd done for Trump, and Trump had never paid him back. He was expecting to get reimbursed for his bonus for 2017, the December check that everybody loves to get for Christmas check as a bonus. He didn't get anything like that from Trump. He was expecting additional amounts of money. So jury saw this basically scratch pad of all the calculations that added up to the $130,000 plus $50,000 multiplied by a certain quantifiers because Cohen was in a certain tax bracket that ended up being $180,000 payment, but doubled because Cohen was in the 50% tax bracket. So it was a $420,000 payment completely. So then it said divided by 12, which ended up being $35,000. But you hear the testimony from Cohen saying something like, but what about Melania? Won't she be upset when she finds out about Stormy? And Trump said, are you kidding? You think I'm going to be on the market long? No problem. Not a chance. Is that the comment that some man makes when he's allegedly worried and concerned about his wife finding out about his infidelity?
I think the prosecutor will probably be bringing that up in closing arguments. Pat, stay with me. Coming up, we're going to discuss Michael Cohen's cross-examination. I'm June Grasso, and you're listening to Bloomberg. Donald Trump's fixer-turned-foe will return to the witness stand tomorrow and could face a bruising round of questioning from the former president's lawyers. Michael Cohen's testimony this week has linked Trump to all aspects of a hush money scheme that prosecutors say was aimed at stifling stories that threatened his 2016 campaign. Cohen is the prosecution's star witness, and they'll end their case with him. Then we'll find out whether the defense will be putting on a case and if Donald Trump will testify in his own behalf. I've been talking to Bloomberg legal reporter Patricia Hurtado, who's been in the courtroom for all the testimony. Pat, before the break, we were talking about the scribblings by the former CFO of the Trump Organization, Alan Weisselberg, detailing how Michael Cohen was going to be paid back. A very important document for the prosecution. And in most cases, the prosecutors would call Weisselberg to the stand to testify about those scribblings that he made. Alan Weisselberg is not going to testify, is he? The jury's going to wonder, I think, where is he?
Well, right now, the DA has no expectations or interest in calling Weisselberg. After all, the man is a twice convicted felon. He pleaded guilty to tax fraud charges on behalf of the Trump Organization. And he pled guilty to perjury, and he perjured himself when he testified in favor of supporting Donald Trump at the civil tax fraud case brought by the New York State AG. So why anybody would call such a tainted witness is anyone's guess. He would not be a reliable witness, and he would be still protecting Trump. I think the prosecution thinks, why would you call somebody that's possibly going to give reasonable doubt to a jury when the documents speak for themselves and you don't need anybody to translate because it's right there in black and white? And they had other Trump witnesses, Trump board witnesses, describing what the paperwork said. So they don't need it. The other thing that Cohen said yesterday was he had to apologize to the American people because he helped conceal the information they needed when they were selecting a man who was running for the highest office in the land. So, I mean, when I heard that, it was stunning to hear because this really is central to the DA's claim that this is an effort to undermine the election. And Cohen said this would have helped citizens understand if they had known the truth about Trump.
So one thing that I found really interesting was the cover-up of the cover-up, where Trump and others tried to keep Michael Cohen in line?
Yeah, that's always been this argument that the DA had filed papers pre-trial saying there was something called the quote-unquote pressure campaign. And I assumed it just meant these tweets by Donald Trump. When Michael Cohen his offices get raided, his office and his apartment and his hotel, he was staying at a hotel because his apartment was being renovated, he said. So when he gets raided in April 2018, Trump is tweeting, oh, he's my guy, I'm supporting him, he's a good man, a great man, a wonderful lawyer. But then the day after Michael Cohen pleads guilty, and people need to remember that the day Michael Cohen pled guilty in August 2018 is the same day that Paul Manafort got convicted. It was a news doubleheader that day. And the next day, Donald Trump is praising Paul Manafort for being a good American, but condemning and damning Michael Cohen as a sleazeball and a terrible lawyer and never hired a terrible man. So I always thought that was the end of the story of this pressure campaign. But then we saw this other lawyer named Robert Costello claimed that he had represented Michael Cohen and was basically asserting that Cohen had told him a completely different story and was a liar and not to be believed. And this happens after Michael Cohen pleads guilty to federal charges. So it added to the murkiness around Michael Cohen. Was he as sleazy as they claimed? We saw tons of emails yesterday that were pretty shocking where Cohen gets introduced to Costello, and then Costello starts sending him these very kind of insinuating, supplicating emails of like, hey, just remember I talked to the big guy. He's on your side. I spoke to our friend, the lawyer, meaning Giuliani. So Costello is apparently a Giuliani ally. And Cohen said he was afraid that Costello was just acting with Giuliani to find out exactly what Cohen was going to do. Keep your friends close, but your enemies closer kind of idea. And you see these constant barrage of emails where Costello is haranguing it to the person he's supplicating and kissing up to him. And then he starts haranguing him like, you don't answer my calls and you're not talking. And we need to discuss it. And why are you thinking of hiring another lawyer? I don't like this. And, basically accusing him of all kinds of nefarious subterfuge. And Cohen is like, hey, I didn't make a decision. You're not my lawyer. And then he starts really almost assailing him. And that was kind of shocking that Costello, and we now know, and Costello went on a campaign of his own denigrating and castigating Cohen. So it's kind of weird that you see that Cohen said he felt that this was a back channel way of Giuliani going between Trump and working behind the scenes to keep him in line and keep him from pleading guilty and trying to constantly take his temperature and find out how close he was to cooperating.
Let's turn now to the cross-examination.
Yeah.
Blanche started the cross trying to needle Cohen, right? Started off on...
Yeah, he did, and he said, didn't you call me, a stupid little expletive in a tweet, and on social media, haven't you said these things? And what he was doing was what the defense was complaining Cohen was doing. And the defense had complained bitterly that Cohen was denigrating and saying mean things about Trump, and he had to stop. And then the judge told the DA, make him stop, get him to knock it off, the judge told the DA. And they said, as much as we can, we're going to try, but controlling Michael Cohen is going to be a different story. But then the defense, Todd Blanche, gets up there and it starts repeating the things he was complaining Michael Cohen was saying. And then I think the judge felt like, okay, let's not make it personal between Todd Blanche and Michael Cohen. Let's talk about why we're here. And I think the judge basically shut that down. And then he started talking about all the mean things he's ever said about Trump, including the T-shirt of Trump behind bars in an orange jumpsuit behind bars, like in a jail cell, handcuffed. And it says Trump 2024. And it's got a little logo on it. And then he started quoting from all the things Michael Cohen has ever said. And we know there are tons of things Michael Cohen has said. We also learned that Michael Cohen has made $3.4 million.
That was really surprising. Explain how he made,
Well, in 2 books and podcasts, merchandising, but it's mainly the books and appearances and speaker fees. So I guess that makes sense. But I mean, if he's charging $32 for a T-shirt. Donald Trump is charging how much money for a pair of gold shoes? $149. So basically, and Stormy Daniels charging things. So, it's kind of crazy. It is a crazy case. Todd Blanche accused Cohen of monetizing his hatred of Trump, which, the jury is going to have to assess whether he's credible or not. Helping in their decision is this raft of documents that may seem like just a bunch of boring pieces of paper, but there is a paper trail that, if the jury wants to look at it that way, could corroborate the story that Michael Cohen said.
You said that Weisselberg would be a tough witness and not believable. Michael Cohen has more baggage, it seems, than Weisselberg.
He does, but he does have an essential story to tell that does have the ring of truth in light of all these documents. And in light of prior testimony, his story and Pecker's story are tied up seamlessly. The only difference in their testimony is David Pecker, he was taking credit for Donald Trump getting the big idea of running for president, that he had done this poll, or he had seen a poll, and he took it to Trump. And then Cohen said in his testimony, which was a little teensy bit contradictory, that he had seen the poll, and he took it to Donald Trump, and that he convinced Donald Trump to run for president. So both of them were trying to claim the big chance. The only difference is that David Pecker never severed his relationship with Trump and still speaks highly of him. Meanwhile, Michael Cohen, he went to prison for him. So that's where the ill will comes from.
You can tell a lot on cross if the witness's demeanor changes. And
it did not. He stayed very calm. The questions were not as needling as Alina Habas. He may come back with more firepower on Thursday.
Because I noticed that, for example, the question of whether or not he wanted to see Trump convicted, the answer is pretty obvious. He's the star witness against him. But it took Blanche question after question after question after question for Cohen to admit it.
Look, I've covered tons of trials, tons of criminal trials, murder, racketeering, financial fraud, you name it. And I've seen plenty of cross-examinations. It was fine. It was workmanlike. And Cohen is a lawyer. And I think that the fundamental part of his story, you could say there's animus, and I guess that's what Blanche was trying to depict him as, being like a toady who was constantly insinuating himself to Donald Trump and a loyal acolyte, and then he became a vicious Trump-hating guy who basically was bent on revenge and bent on making money off Trump.
So this is the last prosecution witness. What has the defense said about a defense? Will they put on a defense?
They have not said. They had asked for the possibility of being allowed to call a witness about election finance, election fraud. And I believe originally that Mershon has strictly limited what that person could say or bring, basically as an expert witness. And they also told Mershon yesterday they haven't decided what they're going to do, including whether or not they're going to call Trump as a witness. And we just have to wait and see. I don't think cross will end tomorrow because we're ending early at 3 for the weekend, and we're not going to have trial on Friday because Trump wants to campaign and attend Barron Trump's high school graduation. So I expect that the redirect will continue until Monday of Cohen, and then I guess we'll see what's going to happen with the rest of the week. But the defense said they're going to review what the judges previously ruled.
So the trial is winding down, but there still could be a lot happening in the next week, depending on the defense. Thanks so much, Patty. That's Patricia Hurtado, Bloomberg legal reporter. Coming up next on the Bloomberg Law Show, opening statements in the trial of Senator Robert Menendez on bribery charges. We'll talk to a reporter who was in the courtroom. I'm June Grasso, and you're listening to Bloomberg. It's the first time in history that a senator has been indicted twice in separate bribery cases. It's also the first time a senator has been indicted under the foreign agent statute. Quite a come down for New Jersey's Democratic Senator Robert Menendez, once a powerful senator and chair of the Senate's Foreign Relations Committee. Now he's on trial, accused of taking cash, gold bars, and a luxury car from two businessmen to perform favors for them and corruptly help the Egyptian government. The trial is taking place in federal court in Lower Manhattan, not far from the hush money trial of former President Donald Trump. Bloomberg legal reporter David Voreacos was in the courtroom for the opening statements today. So, David, in her opening statements, the prosecutor said that this was not politics as usual, but politics for profit.
The prosecutor laid out a very damning portrait of Bob Menendez's actions over 5 years, saying that he sold his office to two New Jersey businessmen in exchange for hundreds of thousands of dollars of cash and gold bars, and that he also used his office to corruptly help the Egyptian government and to help out a businessman seeking money from Qatar. It was a picture that was not pretty and essentially said that Menendez and his wife worked together to receive these bribe payments, and that his wife introduced him to Egyptian officials who then exploited the opportunity to benefit from their relationship with Menendez. In response, the senator's lawyer said that he never took any corrupt actions and that there are innocent explanations for the cash and the gold. The gold, he said, had been in his wife Nadine's family for many years, and he acknowledged that she received gold from one of the businessmen who's on trial, Fred Davies. But he said that the senator had no knowledge of her receiving this gold until after he moved in with her. This was a second marriage for both of them. He also said that Menendez had been in the habit for 30 years of taking cash out of the bank and keeping it in his house, and that he would take it out in amounts of $400 to $500 several times a month. And that's the explanation for more than $400,000 seized by FBI agents in his house in 2022, or in the house that he shared with his wife Nadine, and that there was no corrupt intent, and that he did not receive any bribes at all of cash or gold.
I think we all remember the pictures after the raid of the cash stuffed into a jacket and the gold bars. Did the jury see that today?
They did not see those pictures, no. But, the defense lawyer, Avi Weitzman, for Bob Menendez, spent a good deal of time trying to explain that because he understands how explosive that evidence is. And he knows that he needs to deal with it head on. It looks very bad for a U.S. senator to have so much cash in his house.
For anyone.
He came up with the explanation that this is a long-standing habit for the senator to collect cash, and he says that he has bank records to prove it going back 30 years.
He tried to get his wife's trial severed, and it was rejected, but now she's going to be tried later. Explain what happened.
Nadine Menendez developed an illness that has not been disclosed that requires surgery. And so after rejecting earlier requests to sever her from the trial, the judge agreed a couple of months ago to give her her own trial because of this illness and the time she will need to recover from her surgery.
Is Menendez going to blame his wife for this?
He blamed his wife. His lawyer blamed his wife in the opening statement in several different ways, saying that the two co-defendants were longtime friends of Nadine Menendez who entered into transactions with her that he didn't know about, that they gave her gifts that he didn't know about, and that she was in financial distress in a way that he didn't fully appreciate, and that they were trying to help her out, not bribe him.
Are they still together?
They are still together, although his lawyer said that when he was in Washington, he was essentially leading a separate life from her.
It's never a good look to blame your wife, but it's certainly better if your wife is not being tried with you. So he's lucky in that respect that her trial was severed from his.
One of the reasons that he wanted a separate trial initially was because of the spousal privilege. He wanted to be able to make incriminating statements about her if he testified. And now it appears clearly that, he's prepared to do that.
Did he testify at his last trial?
He did not. That was the one in 2017 where he was accused in a separate corruption case in New Jersey, and the jury did not reach a unanimous verdict. There was a hung jury and a mistrial declared, and the Justice Department then dropped that case.
What the defense is going to try to do is show that he did not have corrupt intent. Is that it?
Correct.
Okay.
Right, and that these were all legal actions that he took. He didn't take any corrupt official acts in exchange for bribes.
Now, a fifth defendant has already pleaded guilty. Tell us about that guilty plea.
Jose Uribe was an insurance broker, and he owned a trucking business in New Jersey. He pleaded guilty and admitted that he bribed Senator Menendez and his wife with a Mercedes-Benz after she needed one. And in exchange for that, he said that the senator interceded on his behalf to try to get 2 criminal investigations in New Jersey that were handled by the state attorney general resolved in a favorable manner. One involved a defendant who was already under indictment who then pleaded guilty, and another was a close friend of Uribe who was under criminal investigation who ultimately was never criminally charged.
Is he going...
Uribe pleaded guilty and will be testifying at trial against Menendez, according to the prosecutor.
Prosecutors have said that they expect to call dozens of witnesses, likely some of the law enforcement officials whom Menendez allegedly pressured to drop investigations. So that would include the top federal prosecutor in New Jersey, the U.S. attorney?
Yes, that's correct. That's Phil Selinger, is the U.S. attorney, and Gerbir Graywall, who's the former U.S. attorney in New Jersey, and he's now the enforcement chief at the Securities and Exchange Commission. They're expected to testify at the trial.
The judge issued a ruling yesterday that will prevent Menendez from presenting testimony from a psychiatrist who evaluated him?
Right. Menendez wanted to present a psychiatrist who would say that Menendez had lasting psychological trauma caused by his parents fleeing Cuba 60 years ago and having their cash confiscated. So that's a reason why he essentially hoarded cash. And the judge did not allow that because he didn't think that he was properly introducing this psychiatrist as an expert. And there was also the argument that Menendez's father committed suicide, that he had been a compulsive gambler, and when Menendez was a young man, he discontinued paying off his father's gambling debts, and that was such a trauma to him that serves as an explanation for why Menendez was hoarding cash.
It doesn't sound like a complicated case, but it is a complicated case for the jury, right?
Well, the trial is expected to last almost 2 months. There's a number of different official acts that will be considered. It spans 5 years of time. There's a lot of cash and gold bars to explain, and there's essentially 3 different bribe schemes that are interwoven that the government needs to prove to make their case. In some ways, it's a simple case. The government says he's a corrupt senator who took bribes, but the details of proving that are going to take a lot of time and effort.
Thanks so much, David. We'll talk with you as the trial proceeds. That's David Voreacos, Bloomberg legal reporter. And that's it for this edition of the Bloomberg Law Podcast. Remember, you can always get the latest legal news by subscribing and listening to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and at Bloomberg.com/podcast/law. I'm June Grasso, and this is Bloomberg.